Hey, everybody, this is Scott, the host of the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast. I would like to invite you to support the show through our Patreon page at patreon.com/smcpod. That's patreon.com/smcpod, where for only $4 per month, you can get early access to episodes and members only content. Once again, that's patreon.com/smcpod, and I thank you for your support. Morgan McCarver, I appreciate you joining me on the show today. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
As am I. So I'm going to get into the book, which is very exciting, in a little bit. But first off, why don't you just let everybody know that is listening, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and that sort of thing, and just give everyone a little introduction.
Of course. Well, that's a great start. So basically, I am a Carolina girl. I grew up in South Carolina in the upstate, and I now live in North Carolina in Asheville. And basically, how all of this kind of ties together and why I'm sharing my story is I've always looked for a creative outlet growing up. So I say my earliest memories of like a clay-like medium are working with Play-Doh. Like my grandmother would make Play-Doh, make it on the stove, it'd be all warm, and we'd dye it with food coloring. And I say that's my earliest start to creativity. And from there, it really just showed itself in different ways. I was really into dancing. And then I had scoliosis spinal fusion surgery right before I went into high school. So I was in 8th grade. I was about 14 years old, and that pretty much put an end to my creative outlet in the form of dancing. And that was really hard for me because everything stopped. I had a year-long recovery process of basically not doing everything that a teenager wants to do, right? So not running, jumping, being adventurous, dancing, bending, twisting, picking anything up. And that was a year-long recovery. And so during that time, I was really looking for another creative outlet. And my mom just signed me up for like a kids' pottery camp. And that's really when my love for ceramics blossomed into what it's becoming today. And I took that first camp. I loved every minute of it. And I just kept signing up for classes. And I just couldn't get out of the dirt. I loved playing in the clay and working with how malleable it was. And it's so hands-on and creating these things out of just basically mud and in the ground. And I loved it so much, I actually ended up getting a degree in that. And it's also what brought me to Asheville. So that's a short kind of version of my story and how I've ended up where I've ended up. And it's crazy that it all connects back to a scoliosis spinal fusion surgery.
That opens up a lot of different avenues for me to go on, which is great because sometimes I'm worried about, what am I going to ask? Are they going to open the door for me? And you open the door for me. So first off, I'm going to, and you're probably not going to answer this. I'm going to put you on the spot big time. Sure. Which is the better Carolina?
Oh, that's hard. The big joke here is that North Carolina has the better roads. I think they put more tax money into it or something. And South Carolina has more potholes. I don't know. I don't know how true that is. I would say I prefer South Carolina barbecue, which also is a big rivalry. But I love sweet barbecue. And so my favorite restaurant has a barbecue sauce made out of cheer wine, actually, like the soda. So it is very sweet. And that was quite a culture shock when I came up to North Carolina. The vinegar-based barbecue, I was not ready.
So I knew there was a difference in barbecue between, let's say, Carolina and Texas or, Kansas City barbecue. I did not know there was a big difference or any difference between North and South Carolina barbecue. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I really didn't either until I tasted it, and I was in for a shock, that's for sure. But I love it here despite the barbecue.
Despite the barbecue, yeah. Yep. Everything else is great. So I just was thinking when you were mentioning playing with Play-Doh as a kid, and it's funny how timeless that is, whether you're my age, I'm in my early 50s, or your age, we still we still did that same thing. You know, we
Mm.
still had Play-Doh. We made it at home. We colored it. The whole thing. It just shows how like timeless. And I know Play-Doh itself is not pottery, but there's a link there between those two things, I think, and it's very interesting that that has remained kind of timeless no matter when you were born, when you were brought up.
That's a great point. And you're right, it's not clay. You don't fire it or anything like you would pottery. But it's something about like the dexterity, developing those motor skills at an early age, working with your hands, and having the freedom of something that is so malleable like clay, or Play Doh in that case, something that you can just rip apart and it doesn't matter, and smush it and do all these different things that you can't necessarily do with other art forms. It's so freeing in a way, and it's so expressive, and you can explore so many different things. I think it's just great to get started as early as you can.
And what were your reactions when your mother signed you up for that first class? Were you did you know anything about pottery? Were you excited about it? Were you a little apprehensive? What were your thoughts going into that?
I was a little apprehensive, and there were some modifications they had to make since I was still in that recovery process. For instance, like a bag of clay is 25 pounds, and obviously I couldn't lift that at the time. There were some things going into that that I was a little bit hesitant for, but it was such a great experience just getting started. And the class was really immersive in that we did different types of things, from throwing on the wheel to hand building to using like an extruder to kind of like crank out different hollow forms. And so it let me explore all these different avenues. And it was really a way, and I didn't know this at the time, but looking back at it, I was getting that flexibility out of the clay that I no longer was able to get with my body through dance. So I was able to experience kind of that freedom, and freedom of expression through my creativity and my artwork, but just in a different form, while I was recovering.
And that's a very good point because for example, I dabble in writing, and for me, what will come to me first is maybe a phrase or a line or a combination of words. I might not have any idea where it's going to end up, but something will tweak my brain and that sounds pretty cool. I'm going to use that and I'll write it down and come back to it later. Is it similar in pottery, or do you pretty much have to know when you're going into it? Okay, today I'm going to make this. And is there inspiration that hits you in that way where you just I suddenly think I want to make this or a bowl or whatever it may be. Is there any similarity in there?
There is. I am a big planner, so I'm always like thinking of projects ahead of time. And pottery is a lot about the setup, just as much about the setup as the execution. So it's a lot of figuring out what I need to do to get started. And I work with plaster molds that I make myself as well. So if I wanted to make a cup, for instance, I would cast that in my plaster mold. But first, I've got to make the plaster mold. So there's a lot of thinking and a lot of preparation. So it's kind of a little bit of both. Now, when I go into the studio, I have kind of my set designs and my set pieces. I'm always adding some things, but for the most part, I'll go in and know what I'm going to do for the day, but I don't always know what I'm going to make, if that makes sense. So I know like today will be a wheel throwing day. I'll plan, 4 to 6 hours on the pottery wheel. And I have an idea that I want to make bowls, but depending on the clay, I might change my mind, because if the clay is too dry or too wet, it can cause problems. And so that's a lot of ceramics, is redirecting, and depending on the weather and the humidity, how much of my pot's dried out, maybe I can't do what I wanted to today, so I'll have to redirect. So to answer your question, yes and no. Yes, I plan a good bit and I know what I'm going to do going into it, but if the weather or something has a different plan, then I can't do what I was going to do. So it really just depends.
So there can be an actual element of improv to it where you had, like you said, you had this plan and then the weather, for whatever reason, the clay, something doesn't lend itself to your plan, and you have to change up on the fly. Is that something that you, because you mentioned you're a planner, and I know some planners, and when their plans get thwarted, shall we say, it throws them off a little bit. Are you that way, or are you pretty easy to say, okay, well, I guess we're doing this today?
Any day in the studio is a good day. So I've learned to adapt, and make the most of my time. Not to say it's not frustrating, but like if I go in and I was planning on trimming some pots I threw and they're too wet, then I'll probably transition and make some ornaments or make these like heart dishes I make where I use like a slab roller, kind of like a gigantic rolling pin. And then
Hmm.
that way I'm not on the wheel like I thought I was going to be, but that's okay. I'm still making things because my goal is to fill the kiln, what I fire in, to make it most, eco-friendly, make the most pots fit in the kiln so I get the best firing. So I'm constantly trying to fill the kiln, however that's going to happen. And adapting is just something I've learned to do. But it's also nice to kind of know how the seasons cycle through, and being in a different state, in a different studio, all of that affects it. And so now that I've been here for a little while, I'm able to plan a little bit better depending on the weather. Like, for instance, now I know it's getting cooler. And so the heater will be on more, so my pots will dry out more quickly. So I know I need to either wrap them in plastic or plan accordingly. And so it's all these things that it just takes time. And that's just part of the experience of learning how the clay works and how your studio practice works when I'm able to go in the studio and adjust.
Now, they say that you have to risk being bad at something to become good at something. And, I come across that in my podcast. I listen back to past interviews, and I'm always saying so and like trying to, okay, I got to not say that as much, and I think it sounds terrible, but you have to go through that learning process in order to be able to be good at anything. How were you in that early process where obviously you're not going to be good at it? Are you the type of person that just understands that that's part of the process and that you're going to get better, or is there any frustration there at the beginning when things aren't turning out quite the way you want them to?
Oh, you hit the nail on the head there. Um, wow. Yeah. I go into this in my book, Got the Artist, as well, but I did not center well on the pottery wheel. If the clay, it's kind of that centripetal force that you see in like ice skaters when they spin really fast. You have to be centered and you have to be exactly on point, or else, that force of the spinning will just throw things off. And that's true with the pottery wheel as well. And that did not come naturally to me for years, and that was really frustrating for me. Just, I'm trying to get a degree in this, and I'm still struggling with what seems to be a very basic thing for everybody else. But I'm left-handed, and I was taught to throw right-handed originally way back at the first pottery classes, and so I couldn't really break that in college. And basically, the left-handed wheel actually spins clockwise, and the right-handed wheel spins counterclockwise. So it was a little bit. I actually throw on the right-handed spinning wheel, but I am still left-handed. So I really had to figure out my own way of doing things in that way, which was really frustrating at the time. And I tried to teach myself to throw left-handed, but it was too ingrained in me at that point. And so, fighting the wheel and fighting myself, and it can be frustrating, but I try to keep a piece from every kind of like era, if you will, of when I'm making. And it's amazing to look back and see like some of the earlier pieces, or even like my earlier cup designs that were just from a couple of years ago, and see how far I've come. It's a great way to kind of gauge my progress and see like, oh my goodness, I thought this was amazing. And, I wouldn't pay money for that now. And look how far I've come, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've actually self-published, and people are going to get tired of me mentioning this on the podcast, but I'm doing it anyway because it's my podcast.
Sure.
So I've actually self-published a couple of books of poetry,
Mm.
and I go back and read earlier ones compared to later ones and think, wow, like where did that come from? And that you can see the progression, and I'm sure it's the same with you, like you just mentioned, that you see yourself getting better, which obviously gives you more confidence, gives you maybe not more drive, but it keeps you at it. And so that's my little story about that. So one of the reasons I do this is because I like talking to interesting people that are doing interesting things, as I like to say as the tagline. And I've already learned a few things from you. First off, I did not know you could even get a degree in pottery. That's amazing to me. So where did you go for that? And is it a 1 year, 2 year? How long is that kind of program?
Yeah, it's actually a 4-year Bachelor's of
Oh,
Arts
wow.
degree. So it's Anderson University in Anderson, South Carolina. It's the South Carolina School of the Arts, and it's not a gigantic program. There were, I think, three of my class in our graduating class. So it was relatively small, but it was a great program. And yeah, I was able to get a degree with a concentration in ceramics, and then I double minored in business and art history. The art history was just because the business was my parents, but it was a good decision either way.
Yeah, never hurts to have a bit of a business background.
Yeah, exactly.
In my mind, it's always a good kind of a base to have. So let's get back to, you mentioned your recovery from your surgery, and I'm interested to know, because one of the things that I try to do on this show is to talk to people about setbacks that they might have had. Some of them are huge setbacks, like major surgery. Some of them are a death. Some of them are, coming back from war. So there's all sorts of different levels to what someone might consider a setback. So just talk a little bit about your process in recovering from that surgery, and also what your mental state was through it. Were you, I'm sure like anyone else, you had ups and downs and so on, but just talk a little bit about that entire process and what that has sort of instilled in you going forward.
Sure. At the time, I would have said it was a major setback. Looking back on it, I'm glad it happened, and I couldn't imagine my life being any different. My life would be completely different if I hadn't had the surgery, and I can't imagine what that would have been like. But basically, it felt like at the time, high schooler, my whole life was just put on hold,
Mm-hmm.
because I was this competitive dancer, and I had gone to nationals that winter, and it was just like an amazing experience. And really, that was where my friend group was, kind of like being at the top of my game athletically, in a way. And that all just had to be put on hold. The other thing with my scoliosis experience is I had an S curve that actually was 3 curves, but I didn't have any pain before the surgery. And so I really didn't want to have the surgery. I understood down the line it would, as an adult, it would affect my organs. My curve was only getting worse. Um, the doctors really put it on hold as long as they could. I was diagnosed with scoliosis about 3 years prior. So they were really trying with bracing and different things to prevent the surgery, but they just really couldn't at that point. And I knew it was required, but also when you're not in pain and you are forced to undergo this crazy surgery, it wasn't like I, was desperate and needed to have the surgery to be out of pain. I actually had more pain after the surgery because
Mm-hmm.
everything had been rearranged, and I had 2 titanium rods and 18 screws drilled into my spine, and I couldn't really do anything. And of course, the crazy incision too was very painful. And I lost my friend group because I couldn't go back to dance. And it really felt like everything just came crashing down. Mentally was not great. I couldn't really exercise. I couldn't really do a lot of things I was used to doing. I actually was kind of homeschooled for a while, for about a month, just to keep up with work, but I couldn't even sit at a normal desk. And then when I did go back to school, I had to bring a pillow with me everywhere. And another classmate carried my textbooks because I couldn't lift those. And there were a lot of mental things. I mean, just the scoliosis alone, especially, high school female, body image issues, all that tied into that. Yeah, it was not great. But looking back, over 10 years later, I'm able to see that is my story, and I would not be the book God the Artist wouldn't exist without that story. I might not have ever discovered ceramics or my love for ceramics without that story. And so it really completely changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm able to see God's plan through all of that. And it's just crazy to think like, yes, I'll be the way I am for the rest of my life. I'm able to exercise now. I'm able to do some of the things I couldn't. I'll never be able to like bend or twist or lift super heavy things or
So
there's of
no
course
games of Twister for you then.
no football, no twister, no trampoline. There's some that, powder puff football in high school and college. I was like, oh man, but whatever, like I'm much better off because I had the surgery. Now my lungs aren't affected and my other organs, I'll live a much more normal, if you will, life. I just have impeccably amazing posture that I can't ever change.
Well, there you go. That's one benefit of that for sure. Now, I wanted to ask about, you mentioned your friend group disappeared. Do you ever think about that and wonder, because I know that I've had people, friends in the past and so on, when I was younger and whatever, that I lost touch with. And do you ever think about those friendships, and do you ever wonder, were they just friends because of the activity we were doing together, or were they real solid friends? Like, does that ever, or was that just something you said, okay, well, I guess, I'll find new friends, it'll be cool and whatever. Do you ever look back on those friendships and kind of analyze that?
That's a good question. It was an interesting situation. So it was an extracurricular dance program outside of my school. So we wouldn't see each other unless we were at that dance class. And so I say they disappeared because I wasn't going. I did, after the year, I was allowed to return to dance, but a lot of my friends were older than me. And so they were entering high school or graduating. And it really never was the same because I physically wasn't the same. So I had to relearn and catch up in that way. But also my friends had kind of moved on. They had graduated or they were doing high school things, getting ready for prom or whatever. And so they weren't really dancing as much. I still keep up with a couple of them on Facebook, and that's fun to see. But I had other friends through school as well. So it wasn't like, I was completely abandoned. But it was really sad because we all kind of were doing amazing things competitively and reaching those amazing goals, moving up in the levels and all these things. And then for me to be removed from that situation, that felt like at the height of, amazing things, that was really hard.
At that point in your life, everything is possible. And,
right.
You're seeing how that you are, if you're dancing competitively, obviously you're good at it. So that's a major part of your life just taken away, and that wouldn't be easy for me to adjust to, let alone someone that's your age at that particular time. So the fact that you have found something to replace it with, let's call it replace it with, and that you're obviously excelling at, that's got to be a blessing for you.
It was a great experience. My school didn't really offer ceramics classes specifically in their art program. And so I was taking those classes in the evenings after school. And so at that point, I was with all these retirees, if you will. So I was the youngest one by far in the class. So it was a very different friend group that I transitioned into. They're all enjoying their evening, drinking wine, throwing pots, and it's like little, sophomore Morgan just playing on the pottery wheel.
Right.
But it was a great experience. They took me under their wing really and really helped me prepare for a degree in ceramics, helped me get my portfolio set up to apply for scholarships. And they were an amazing support group when, I didn't really see it coming, but they were great.
I'm not sure, you probably know who Jordan Peterson is, or have at least heard the name. He's a pretty famous Canadian. He's often in the news. He's often under duress from certain segments of the political society, let's say. But he was telling a story on a podcast I was listening to about the first time he decided that this is when he was younger as well, a young man, and he wanted to start going to exercise, wanted to go to the gym, and he showed up at a swim class, and it was exactly the same as you. There was him and a bunch of older ladies. And he said he's, felt self-conscious. He felt he didn't belong there. But, same thing. They were nice to him. They encouraged him. He took that and so you never really know where your support or your community is going to come from.
Exactly. That's a great point.
So let's move on to the faith aspect of it. I am personally not a person of great religious faith. I'm not a churchgoer, but I am very interested in Bible stories and how it relates to today and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to sort of touch on that a little bit. Were you always a person of faith because your family has always been? Is that how it started for you? Just a family thing, going to church and so on?
That is a great way to put that. Yes, both of my parents are Christians, and so I was raised in a Christian home. I was brought to church. I was, dedicated in the church, if you will. And then my faith had to become my own at some point, right? You can't have someone else's religion. It has to be your own. And that really, that has some major milestones, several parts of my life. So I gave my heart to Jesus. I became a Christian at about 7 or 8 years old. And then, I was still being driven to church. My life wasn't hard at that point. I was just kind of doing the Christian thing. But when I had my surgery, my faith really started to become my own because I had nothing to rely on. I was so helpless. And so I realized that this was God's will for my life. I prayed so hard to not have surgery, and obviously that was not his will. And even though I was mad, I knew that he was going to get me through that if that was his will, and whatever would happen would be because he allowed it to happen. And so I really grew in my relationship with God in that way. And I chose to go to a Christian university. It was a great experience. And my professors really started challenging me in a way of relating everything back to God. So the symbolism in the clay, the relationship between the potter and the clay, relating that to our lives as Christians in relation to God and what that looks like, that type of relationship. And that's really how my faith started to even more become my own. When I graduated, I was again disconnected from a friend group that I had had for 4 years. We had moved to different states. Everything was changing. And then especially when I moved to North Carolina, that was on the verge of the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, and everyone was still masking. I was completely alone. I moved up here to actually work for a potter as an apprentice for a while, like a studio manager kind of position, just because I couldn't take the retail job anymore. I needed to work on my own art, get away from the COVID customers, if you will. And but I knew no one except for my boss. That was really the only person I knew. I was staying at an Airbnb long term, and I knew it was God's will. I had been praying for a change of situation, and he allowed it to happen. And I just felt that peace about that. But you don't know what you don't know. And moving to a new state completely alone, it has strengthened my faith in so many different ways. But it's been an amazing experience. And because of that, I'm able to recognize God's voice a little bit better and understand his will a little bit better. And of course, there's always room to grow. And I'll never have it perfect, but just continuing to grow in my relationship with him and get to know him better has just been amazing.
Do you think that, I'm trying to word this so that it makes sense. You mentioned a couple of times making your faith your own. Do you feel that unless you do make your faith your own, that it's not that it's not really faith, but it's more somebody else's thing, that you're just kind of along? Like if you had just gone along with what your parents did and, going to church with them and whatever, but you got to branch out and, like you said, make it your own. Do you feel that that's an important part of faith, is taking that journey on your own to find out what it means for you?
I do. You have to make the decision yourself. If you're going to completely give your life to Jesus and completely surrender everything and say, this is not my life, these are not my decisions. I recognize my mistakes. I recognize that I am imperfect. And the only way that I can be whole is to completely surrender my life to Jesus. That has to be your own decision. Like you can go through the motions, and there are stories of people who have made declarations and said, like, I didn't know what that meant at the time, and I want to rededicate my life. That can be a common thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my church has been really good about helping. They have different classes of like diving into theology, and I'm no theologian, but I would say it has to be your own decision, right? You can't, no one can decide for you what your faith is going to look like, what your afterlife is going to look like. That's not to say I wasn't a Christian before I moved to North Carolina. I'm simply saying that I did not need to rely on God, or I thought I didn't need to rely on God at those points in my life when I was, under my parents' roof and everything was good, and I didn't really have to fend for myself and make my own decisions. And getting out into the real world and choosing to make decisions that would please God, or ask his opinion, ask for his guidance on those decisions, and really completely give my life to him. It's been amazing how he has transitioned my life into something that it is now, and I can completely see that that is his will. And it like, this story is too crazy to not be his will, right? How do you get from scoliosis to ceramics? That is not a normal linear jump,
Yeah, from dancing to pottery. Yeah, that's
Right,
a
exactly.
little bit of a detour there. Um, the other thing I wanted to ask is that, and again, neither of us are theologians, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm not a particularly religious person myself. But one of the things that is concerning to me about our society today, Canadian and U.S. society, is that I think the lack of faith has eroded our society in a big way. And that's coming from someone who's not religious, because I think that if you don't have some kind of faith to ground you and to teach you right from wrong, and to teach you those important lessons, then society's going to decay. It's inevitable. That So I find myself in my early 50s, never been a religious guy before, wanting a return to a more faith-based society than we have now. What do you think of that? And what do you think there is a correlation between the erosion of morals and the decay of society between and the loss of faith?
I would agree. Yes. Again, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a pastor. But my personal experience, my personal relationship with God, I would agree with that, because all of my questions are answered. Right. I have the Bible. I have something that God wrote, or God inspired these men to write. Every word comes directly from Him, and so I'm able to read these words, and I'm able to know where do I stand on this issue, where do I stand on that issue. And I would challenge you to dive into that yourself and learn, because there's both sides, right? So there's sides where people are saying, because of this, because I'm a Christian, this is what I believe. And it might not always be biblical. So I would challenge you, don't judge every book by its cover, don't judge every Christian the same, in a way. But you're right. If you have nothing to go off of, if there's no guidebook that you're following, or roadmap, or whatever analogy you want to use, what are you following? If you're following the world, they change opinions every day. So
Yeah.
how do you keep up? You don't have anything, you don't have any foundation to base any decisions off of. And it's kind of like the parable of, the wise man builds his house on the rock, and the man who doesn't know any better builds his house on the sand. And if you don't have that firm foundation, then everything's going to wash away when the floods come, and you're not really left with much. And so that's when, again, when everything's good, you don't notice that you need something.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you hit those hard points, and when you're all alone and you need to make a decision and it's a big decision or you need guidance, that's when you really realize what you need to rely on.
Hmm. And one of the things that I've always said, because I've had friends who were atheists, and I watch people talk online or whatever about being atheists. And one of my things is, no matter what you get out of it, you have a place to go every week where you have a community of people who are there for all the same reason. They have all the same, maybe not exactly the same beliefs, but the basis of the same beliefs. You have a community. You go there, they welcome you. You have a cup of coffee afterwards, you chit chat, you go home. It makes you feel better, makes you feel better about the day in general, just being around a community of people that you share something with. And I think that's something that is also missing in our current society, is that sense of community, because online communities don't count. As we know, they're not real. So do you think there's something to that as well? Just the sense of community that brings?
I do, and I really took my time looking for a church to get connected with in the area that I live in, because I knew, I'm not living where my parents live anymore. This is going to be my church, and I really wanted to feel good about the decision. And I do. I love the church I'm in and the community. And again, it's community where you don't always expect it. I'm friends with people my own age. I'm part of a community of young professionals, but I'm also a youth leader for seventh grade girls. And most of the other youth leaders have students, have children in that program. And so they've been moms or dads of, 10, 15 years. And it's amazing that community I can find with them as well. And, I don't have that same life experience. But something that is really amazing is that we all are born again Christians. We know that this isn't everything, that we are going to have an even better life in the afterlife when we are free of pain, free of sin, and that we will be with God in a new world. And that is something that has really helped me. Like when I have friends who live far away or friends that I make that I don't know if I'll ever see them again, to know that we share that and I'll see them on the other side, that is really comforting.
Hmm. So the place where I work for my day job is actually, our offices are located inside what is technically a convent. Retired sisters live there and are cared for there, basically like a retirement home for nuns. And when anyone asks me how, like, because I've only been in the job for a little over a year, when they ask me how it's going, and so on, I always say that one of the things that I love about it most is that when I walk in there, I have not had a single negative interaction with anybody in that
Oh, wow.
building ever. And just getting up to go to work somewhere that that you're going to see friendly faces every day, and so many people say hi to you in the hallway, and it's just a very pleasant atmosphere. And I think the fact that they are obviously people of faith, I think plays a big role in that, because I think they craft their lives in that manner. And like I said, I haven't had a single interaction that has been negative. Now that could eventually change, but I doubt it will be a major negative. So, what are your thoughts on that, and just the whole idea of that kind of calming presence that you can walk into whenever you need to, and you're just going to feel at ease going in there?
Yeah, several things. So when you were first mentioning that, I would say whenever you do commit your life to Jesus and become a Christian, you it's called the Holy Spirit. So it's part of the Trinity, right? So you've got God, who is fully God. You've got Jesus, who came to earth and was fully man and fully God. And then you have the Holy Spirit, which is what Jesus gave to the world when he returned to heaven. And that is a spirit of God that lives inside every Christian. And it is a conscience in a way. It helps guide you and convict you when you've done wrong. And so I would say if you're a strong Christian, or if you're a Christian in general, you've got the Holy Spirit inside of you. Of course, if you are a strong Christian, the Holy Spirit will be more convicting. And so that's one way, like, I don't enjoy doing wrong things because I feel this sense of guilt. And now I've got to, come before the God of everything and say, Lord, I like said these mean things and I am so embarrassed, like in the moment, I really just wanted to say it or whatever it is. And now, like on the grand scheme of things, why did I have to say that? Or why did I have to do that? And so the Holy Spirit does play a big part in that. But I would also say for the listeners who have said, well, I've met, some pretty nasty Christians or whatever your experience might be, we're all human, right? We all make mistakes, and the Holy Spirit does not prevent us from making mistakes or doing wrong or sinning, if you will. It is a guide, and it is from God, and anyone who becomes a Christian gets the Holy Spirit. It's not something that is secretive or only for a selective few. Anyone gets that, but it is not it's not a free for all pass. I still make mistakes, I still sin every day, and if I have sinned against anyone listening, I am so sorry because it is part of human nature that you can't escape, right? You live in a fallen world. But there is something about when you find a church that is just really in the Word of God, seeking after God's will and trying to live biblically as the church should and do what they should. It is a very calming place. It's a very safe place. And it's a place that I just enjoy going to. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else when I'm there. It's just so comforting. And it doesn't matter if I'm going to a service and I'm all alone, or I'm going to a service to meet some friends. It's just that kind of interaction. And I think part of it is, God is in that place. We're going there to worship. And there's a Bible verse that says where 3 or more are gathered, God is in that place. And so we're going there to worship God. And little glimpses, bring us closer. And that can contribute to just that peace, the peace of God. But also just knowing that you're going with a fellow group of believers. It is a very safe space.
Mm-hmm. What you mentioned about making mistakes and, going back and looking at your actions and, trying to reconcile them and feeling bad about them. I think that's another thing that doesn't happen when someone doesn't have faith of some kind. Because then I think it's easy to just say, oh, well, that's what I did. There's no consequences. Whereas for someone like yourself, basically, everything that you know about your faith says you shouldn't have done that. And you question that. You look inside of yourself, try to figure out why you might have done that, whatever. Do you feel that in our society today, there is that general lack of feeling that there's going to be consequences, whether it be for some kind of actions you've taken, something you've said, even in schools now, it doesn't seem that disciplining kids is allowed anymore. Do you feel that that has kind of eroded as well, that just the sense of personal responsibility?
I would say so. And I think a lot of it just stems from selfishness. Even back to, like you were saying, parenting and like teaching kids at school, disciplining at school, the parents are selfish. Why would you discipline my child that way? And I think that's really the root of it, selfishness and pride. And anyone is entitled to their own opinions. And yes, they are, but that doesn't mean that every opinion that exists is right. If it's my opinion that the sky is green, then I probably need to get my eyes checked. It doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean that the sky is green. That is just my opinion. And I think we're relying too much on finding truth in everybody's opinions instead of finding truth where we need to be finding truth.
And I think that also, we take feelings into account way too much. And I think that convenience, because it's easy, if a kid's acting up, it's easier for his parent to buy him a chocolate bar to keep him quiet than it is to discipline him in the mall in front of, everybody, right? So I think the convenience and the ease, trying to do things the easy way, I think that's a big part of it as well. I mean, again, I'm no expert on anything really, but that's just kind of what I see from my own, like you said, selfishness, and I think just wanting to move on is
Yeah.
another reason.
And respect, you could say that too. And that just trickles down, like if you think back, of course I wasn't alive, but if you think back to like World War II era, even, I mean, not that far away, but like just the respect for like the president, even, and things like that, like whether you agree or not with whoever's in power, there's still like a kind of respect there. And I think just the trickle down effect of not respecting authority, not respecting your parents, your teachers, your boss, because you think you're right. And that just gets back to selfishness again. Not a great cycle.
No, and that's an interesting point because I'm politically conservative, and our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is not very popular. Let's put it. And there, I see trucks driving around and cars with bumper stickers or flag that say "F Trudeau," and I think that's not the best way to get your message across. And I'm no shrinking violet, I swear, I've heard these words before, but to me that there's just a decorum that you should have no matter what, because now you're driving around with that on, and some kid in a car says, "What does that mean?" So. And I just think, like you mentioned, the presidents, I think you still have to, even if you don't agree with them, you don't like them, you want them out, you should still at least respect the office and show some decorum. So I don't know, that's just my 2 cents about that.
No, I agree. Or at least have like an intelligent opinion of why you don't like them, instead of just cussing them out, like have a good reason. Like, tell me why.
Yeah. I mean, I've probably cussed them out before, but I try not to, because I like to practice what I preach sometimes. Sure. So let's, when did you get the idea to write a book about pottery and God?
Yeah, that kind of came at the end of my college experience. I was actually looking for a book to read, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. And at that point, I really just felt the Holy Spirit telling me that this could be something that I could start working on. And I had actually, as long as I had been a Christian, I had never read through the Bible all the way. And that really was a challenge, if I'm calling myself a Christian and I have not read the entire Bible. So that was really convicting. And I started reading the Bible, just start to finish, Genesis to Revelation. And there's different ways people say to go about it, chronologically or however, but I didn't follow any kind of study plan. I just went cover to cover. And it took me about 3 years. And all that time I'm compiling verses that relate to pottery or art or creativity, different things, trying to just understand the full sense of what's going on here, and learning a lot along the way about, what's actually in the Bible, what's actually not in the Bible. And it was eye-opening for sure. And so that's kind of where the idea started coming from. I tried to get it published way early on, like back in like 2019. And the manuscript was real rough at that point. And only one publisher would touch it. And they said, I'd need to pay a bunch of money and do a lot of rewrites. And I actually probably shouldn't even write it. It should be somebody else, and I'd need to pay them. And, I had just graduated college, so I did not have that kind of money to just throw at something that who knew what kind of outcome that would have.
Right.
And so I prayed a lot about it, and I just felt the Holy Spirit saying, you don't have enough experience, put this aside. And I thought that meant decades down the line, I'd be retired and bored and sitting in my rocking chair and taking notes. And it really wasn't. It was 3 years. And in that time, I worked for a ceramic supply store. It's one of the largest online ceramic stores in the nation. And so I did like customer service for them. I taught private lessons at the same time in ceramics, and I was getting a lot of experience that way. I was working on my own art. And then the pandemic hit. I moved states to work as an apprentice, focus on my own art, kind of see the business side of like what a studio potter actually means. So I got more experience that way. And things just kind of kept building and building on themselves. I grew in my faith at that point because I had moved. That's when that all happened. I had different jobs. I worked at an art museum for a while. So all of these things were kind of culminating, giving me this experience that I thought was going to take decades. And really, it was a very fast-paced situation, which is how I like to roll anyway. So that was fine with me. But I had some time this past January. It was cold. I live in the mountains, and I didn't really want to go outside or do much. It wasn't really snowing or anything. And I had some extra time, and I really felt the Holy Spirit telling me to like revisit that. And I pretty much rewrote the whole thing in about 2 weeks and started looking for publishers then. I reached out to a couple, but I really only heard back from one. And that had been my prayer, like, whatever this is going to happen, I tried the first time. Lord, if you want this to happen, it needs to be from you. I know nothing about publishing books. I didn't go to school for that. I don't know anything about that. I don't know anyone who's published a book. So if this is going to happen, it has to be from God, because I have no guidance whatsoever. And it was. He gave me one publisher that reached out and gave me some advice. They said it needed to be longer. So I spent a week and a half re-editing, adding some text, sent it back as an application, and then I got accepted in April. And the rest has just been full speed ahead. It's been crazy, but it's been such a blessing and so amazing to be able to tell my story this way. I didn't talk about my scoliosis experience for about 10 years. I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. It was not a part of my life that I was proud of. And I just didn't talk about it. And then really coming on the other side of that, I realized, looking back a decade later, I'm able to see, like, yes, that was a transitional moment in my life, and God gave me that experience to give me these experiences, and He gave me this story to tell. Obviously, if He let this book be published, my story needs to be told. And so now I feel like I need to play catch up, right? I haven't been sharing my testimony, and now I'm just trying to tell as many people as I can, like, look what God has done in my life. There's no way this could have been me. There's no way I could have done any of this, from discovering ceramics to getting a book published. This is all from Him, and just give Him all the glory in the process.
Kind of loop back to what we talked about earlier about being bad at something until you're good at it. What was it like looking over that initial manuscript again when you were trying to rewrite it? Were you even thinking, "Oh my God," no pun intended?
I was like, Lord, I can't believe you even let me try to get this first one published. I was just so negative, I was so just snarky about like having my surgery and being all frustrated, and that's how this came about, and I didn't like. And yeah, at the time I was not happy to have it, but now I'm looking back at it as a blessing, which sounds so cliche, but I've matured since then. I'm able to see really what my life, that is my life. Like, my life would not be what it is now without my spinal fusion surgery. Who knows, I could be dancing somewhere, or I don't know. But it wouldn't be pottery. And just recognizing that the thing I love to do, like, that is my hobby, that's my job, side job. I have a 9-to-5, but that's my thing I do on the weekends. That's my thing I do after work. That's what I think about all the time. I'm working on things over my lunch break. And to think, like, I wouldn't have this, and I wouldn't have gone to college for this and all of this without the spinal fusion surgery. I'm able to come full circle. And so this book is a lot less snarky and a lot more informative, if you will, in my story as a Christian ceramic artist. So,
do you think that initial attempt that you self-described as snarky, do you think that was in a way finally boiling out of you the frustration? I'm sure you've dealt with it in some ways in the past, but do you think that initial attempt was just, this is what I went through and I was frustrated? And do you think there was a little bit behind that, or do you think it was just the way you wrote it?
No, that's a good point, and I hadn't thought about that until now, but you're probably right. Because I've mentioned this to other people before, but like, during the time, this wasn't that long ago, but even then, mental health wasn't what it is now, if you will. And so I didn't go to therapy. That wasn't an option given to me by the doctors or my parents. Like that just wasn't even thought of, that you would
Hmm.
go to therapy for a major traumatic surgery. Like, your brain's fine. It's your body. It's a physical thing.
Right.
And so like looking back on that, yeah, I probably needed a therapist at that point. I'm hoping now people who are having the surgery, or doctors who are giving the surgery, I hope they are aware of that. But I wasn't at the time, as
Hmm.
a high schooler, and that wasn't something that people just did. So yeah, that rough draft probably was me kind of having a little therapy session, a little pity party. And then once I look back at it 3 years later, and it's like, Morgan, get over that, get over yourself. It's not
Well,
all
it
about
kind
you.
of, yeah, it kind of shows how, like, in that time you progressed in your
Yeah.
own thinking about it to be able to think, oh my God, I wrote that. That's a little bit on the snarky side, but
Right.
so I think that even that shows progression and growth.
Yeah.
So let's talk about I was looking when I looked up your bio and so on. One of the things I wanted to ask you is about mentions of pottery in the Bible and what those sections, what those readings might mean to you personally. So, how many times is it mentioned, and is there one that kind of resonates with you more than the others?
I mean, how many times? I don't even know. I lost count. I should probably go back and count. But there's so many different references, from clay to broken vessels to pottery to earthen vessels to, there's all different kinds of references in the Bible about comparing humans to clay and different things. God is the potter. All the way back to the Old Testament, all the way to the New Testament, all throughout the Bible. And not only that, but I also delve into God's creativity in any form, and our creativity in that way as well. And so the Old Testament does a great job about being descriptive of how the temple is made and the robes, how they look, and beautiful descriptions. And so there's so many different artistic verses in the Bible, but they don't always make it to the Sunday sermons.
Hmm.
And so it was really fun for me to be able to dive into these verses with my background in ceramics and really look at them from a side that, maybe they weren't interpreted in this pottery way. If I was reading something about welding, I would not be able to interpret it with a welding background. I don't have one.
Hmm.
And so a lot of these verses are me saying, like, this is where I'm coming from as a ceramicist and as a Christian. I'm able to look at this verse with the knowledge of both sides and be able to kind of shed some light on God's characteristics in that way. Probably the most common verses are in Jeremiah. He's a prophet in the Old Testament, and it's a verse. It's actually a little chapter about the potter's house. And so Jeremiah God instructs him to go to the potter's house, and he watches the potter throw clay on the wheel, and then the pot doesn't turn out just right, and he smashes the pot and reworks the clay and puts it back on the wheel. And God is talking to Jeremiah during this time, saying, this is what I'm going to do to the people. Like, everything might not be perfect the first time, but God always redeems us. And so that's why he sent his son to redeem us. And he took the punishment that we should have had. And it's just a beautiful story all the way back before that ever happens, before Jesus is ever born, hundreds of years before. God is already foreshadowing. And I think that's some of the most beautiful things, like that, is God's constant timelessness. He's not constrained by time like we are. And so he's always like hinting at these little secrets and little good things that are going to come down the line, and always taking care of his people. He's going to redeem his people in that way. But I completely related, going back to me not being able to center. I was like, yes, I know what you're talking about. I have had the pot fall to the wheel head and scrape it off and rework the clay. And yeah, it's frustrating, and it's not easy for the clay, like, it's been so waterlogged from being on the wheel. You have to let it sit out, or you have to kind of dry it as you wedge it, which is kind of like kneading.
Hmm.
And so it's not just an easy process, and if you're just reading over that verse, it moves so quickly that you might think Oh yeah, he took it off. He kind of like put it into a ball and threw it back on. And that's not really the process. It's taking the clay off and getting the water out and wedging it so the air bubbles are moved to the surface, and you're making that clay homogeneous again. You're moving all of the particles in the same way, so it's the even wetness of the clay, and you're then forming it into a ball that can be put on the wheel. And so there's a lot of steps that go into that. And we can look at that from our lives too. Like you make a mistake, it's not immediate bounce back. And you have scoliosis surgery, it's not an immediate bounce back. There's recovery, it takes time for that redemption. And so it's stories like that are just so beautiful and so symbolic in that way.
And then there's so many interpretations that you ask 100 people, they might interpret it 100 different ways. But you mentioned, it not turning out, so you break it, and that's a lot like us, right? Like we have this idea of what we want to be and how we want our lives to turn out. It often doesn't work that way, and we get broken in the process. So, but that's not the end. We can be remolded and reformed and reshaped into something either different than what we originally planned, like in your case, or just a different version of what we had originally planned. Mm-hmm. So exactly. Yeah, there's just so many, and that's one of the things that's so interesting about biblical stories for me is that to me it's a lot like music. Again, you ask 100 people what a song means, you might get 100 answers. And so there's just so many ways that you can use those stories. Even if you're not a deeply religious person, those stories are there for a reason, and you can get something from them.
Right. That's a great point. And, when Jesus was saying the parables, like in the New Testament, those weren't for deeply religious people. Those were just for everyday people. And that's the beauty of it, too. Like, you don't have to be an amazing scholar to read the Bible. I'm not. I want to be. I want to learn more, and I want to read all these study books. And I've read several. I want to read more, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand the Bible if I don't read them,
Mm-hmm. I will send you a link to, I mentioned Jordan Peterson. He's one of my favorite people. He's very very, very smart guy. And he does a YouTube series on different sections of the Bible. Like I think he did Genesis, and these are like hours and hours and hours long, and what the stories mean, and how they relate to today. And it's incredibly interesting. So I'll drop you that link in an email. You might find them interesting as well. So when is the book coming out? And I'm sure it'll be on Amazon. I always ask people, where's the book available? Probably be available on Amazon, but I'm sure you have a website. So let us know about the book, when it's coming out, and where online people can find you if they want to learn more.
Okay. It is releasing January 9th, 2024. It's available for pre-order now. You're right. It is traditional publishing, so it's available wherever books are sold. So it's already available for pre-order on Amazon, like you said, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. I'm trying to think of others, but pretty much wherever books are sold. You can also find links to those on my website. And my website is just my name, morganmccarver.com. And from there, you can sign up for my newsletter, follow me on social media. I have a link to my Etsy page if you want to buy some pots online. You can pre-order the book, and there are some little freebies that are related to the book as well. Some little digital book quotes that I've kind of beautified, if you will, that would be really fun to use as a wallpaper background or print them out, do things with them. So you can find those freebies on my website as well.
Cool. Any plans on starting your own YouTube channel and teaching pottery on YouTube?
That would be fun. If anyone dives deep enough, they can find some college videos of me working in the studio. And I've got my long braided hair, and I'm going at it. But maybe, I don't know. Actually, I've been wondering about that. I'm just getting into like the whole Instagram Reels thing, so I'm kind of liking the video now that I'm understanding it a little bit more. So YouTube could be in the future. We'll see.
We'll see. You never know where it's going to take you, right?
Never know.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's been a fascinating conversation about many different things, and pottery and faith and society and all sorts of good stuff. So I wish you best of luck with the book, and I will post the link to the pre-order on the podcast, which is going to release this coming Sunday. So I hope I can drive some sales your way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such an enjoyable conversation.
It's been a pleasure, Morgan. Thank you.